much for that. I want to give a warm welcome to one of my colleagues, one of my great colleagues, Christian Greer. Christian is the president and CEO of the Michigan Science Center, and one of our esteemed keynote speakers. And Christian and I also have the pleasure of serving together on the ASTC board, on the Association of Science and Technology Centers board. Christian is a seasoned STEM professional with nearly 30 years of experience. He recently served as the chief officer. So he started when he was, so what, Christian, you're 27, you started when you
Yeah,
were
yeah,
10.
right.
Um, he recently served as the chief officer of science, education, and experience at the St. Louis Science Center, where he, among other duties, oversaw Science Beyond the Boundaries, a network of over 275 science centers and museums from around the world. Christian has also served in leadership positions at the Adler Planetarium, Denver Museum of Nature and Science, Hive Chicago Learning Network, Chicago Architecture Foundation, and the Shedd Aquarium, where he launched Midwest Regional Underwater Robotics Competition. Christian received his bachelor's degree in physics from Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. He is a Northwestern University Kellogg Executive Scholar and Chicago Community Trust Leadership Fellow. Christian is currently a doctoral candidate in learning technologies at Pepperdine University, where his research interests focus on social network analysis, distributed leadership, and online collaborative learning environments. And I just want to add a little more personal note. We've all been struggling with COVID, and I've really appreciated, Christian, your leadership in the network of science centers to help us think through and navigate this pandemic. So thank you for being with us, and I'm so excited to hear you speak.
Well, Lucy, thank you. And I'd like to thank everyone for giving me this opportunity. Boy, what an amazing time in learning and education, especially in informal education. And I'm really very much interested in trying to figure out how to navigate it all. I know that many of you are doing the same thing, just hearing some of the questions and how we're doing it. But if we're here on this call, we're doing it. It may not be the best way to do it. It may not be the only way to do it, but sometimes just doing it gets us to the next level. Don't you agree? All right, so we'll jump right in. I have some slides to share if you don't mind me throwing some of these up, and hopefully you can see them. I'll see if I can go to my full screen mode, and we'll walk through them. Just let me know if this is 5 by 5. All right, thumbs up. Okay, so let me go ahead and get us started. I want to thank Dustin Miller. I can't see him here. I can only see Lucy and Emily, but I want to thank him for the conversations that we had as well with Lucy, just giving me this opportunity and kind of coaching me through this. He had mentioned this theme of re-envisioning the future, and I will say that in many ways, isn't that what we're always trying to do, right? Like Lucy said, I work at the Michigan Science Center, and it's nice to be in a snowy town, right? So this is what it looked like last night in Detroit. And if you don't know about Detroit, when the snow hits, it's like we're prepared for snow. We have snow up here, but given the level of city services, sometimes that doesn't mean that your street is getting clean. So we might be in the same boat as some Texans with a little snow down here trying to figure it out, but we manage. I was looking at the weather map, and if you haven't gone to Weather Underground or any of these other sites that give you sort of this full-time weather, you should, just as a science STEM geek. And I was just looking at these areas down there where parts of Texas were really being hit, and it just kind of reminds me that we need to be mindful that people are being disrupted by this weather. And I think there've been a few deaths across the country as well, and some car pileups and stuff. And my heart goes out to all those people that, usually when you see snow, you want to be excited and enjoy it. It's not always very safe for everyone. So I just want to make that comment, especially for those of you in Texas. Also, I will say just quickly, in Detroit, we are the only place I think, or one of the few places in the United States where you can actually, Canada is south of you. So that's kind of weird, just to think about. But that's exactly kind of the way it is. My goals for today are to do these four things, and hopefully they'll make sense to you. I'd like to plant a seed, maybe of a new idea in some of my talk. I'd like to light a fire and for passion of your work. Maybe you have that fire and that flame, but it's a little dimly lit. We want to get it reignited. Um, and although not everything is filling a pail, but sometimes we need new ideas and concepts to keep us going or to give us insights. But more importantly, I'd like to transform your thinking. And when I say transform your thinking, I believe that that's necessary for what Lucy and Dustin were telling me about re-envisioning the future. How do we transform ourselves? What does that look like? And what does that mean? In terms of participation, I'm going to try to see if I can look at the chat while all this is going on, but sometimes it's a little different to watch the chat and manage the slides, but I'll try. And then if Dustin and Lucy, if I need help, if you'll grab a good question out there for me, that'd be fantastic. Well, speaking of scavenger hunts, you may find some deeper meanings in some of the things that I'm presenting because the concepts are a lot deeper than what I can talk about in just a few minutes. But that'll be important for you to take a look at. Um, I'd like for you to express your thoughts and just shout it out in the dialogue. I like to make sure that we have really good dialogue and connecting in that way. And then, if you can, either write down or think in your mind, keep in your mind of one insight that you had during the presentation you thought might help you or help others to share with your organization, wherever you might be. So I'm going to start with critical questions, and this is something I like to do is begin with a question. And why? How is that any different than science? Right? Is observing phenomena and asking questions about things. It starts with a question, and hopefully that question is something that you can begin to hypothesize and come up with an answer for. It's hard to answer questions with where it's not a clear path to get answers, but it does happen. So these are the three that I've got up here, and I might modify these a little bit in a few minutes. What crisis are we in? Why are we in a crisis? Um, and how do we get out of a crisis? So what is the crisis that we're in? And these could be plural too, I guess. Um, why are we here, and how do we get out of it? Well, speaking of crisis, I guess I could talk about the Houston Texans front office for those football fans out there, because it's been a mess. I'm going through withdrawal right now. I'm a big NFL fan, and it's hard to not see the games each week. But it's been an interesting season, a good season, and hats off to the NFL for actually pulling this off during COVID. I didn't think that would happen, and they did a really good job. Something we all can learn from, right? But the crisis we're more familiar with on a serious note looks like this. These spike proteins is essentially what Moderna and Pfizer's vaccines are trying to train your body to fight against to prevent the virus. But there's a lot of other crises that are taking place. Here's another one, the crisis of the racial reckoning and social justice that's been going on forever. There's nothing new, but what's new about it is we may be finally ready to ask the questions and to look in the mirror a little bit more than before. I hope so. And hopefully people like yourselves are being transformed as we start to think about racial justice, equity, and nonviolence. Also, our crisis of democracy, which you could argue is always a case of democracy anywhere in the world that democracy could be threatened. But it's been threatened in ways that we haven't seen before in our country. And it's something to be concerned about in a lot of different ways. And the threats come from more than just storming a Capitol. I mean, there's threats on Wall Street, there are threats to our country's security. There's threats given that, many of our citizenry aren't even educated or have access to things. All these things threaten our democracy. And we have to be mindful of our portion of it as informal educators. Is this all making sense? Is this working for everyone? All right, so here's a little bit of a crisis thing here. I'll just say, intense trouble or danger. As much as I want to say that I want to talk about trouble and danger, I'm going to modify this a little bit because I think I'm more interested in the source of the crisis rather than the crisis itself. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes the source of the crisis is actually a dilemma. So this is a word I'm going to reintroduce you to. It's a dilemma. It's part of our story. The two or more alternatives. Is the alternative to mask up so we can keep people safe, or how do we restart the economy? We get arguing over things quite a bit, and this happens the same thing in an organization. Do you want butts and seats or you want mission? It's a dilemma, right? And as CEOs, and I'm talking to all of you as in two frames of reference. One, as a CEO, meaning you're the CEO of whatever you're doing at your organization, whether it's keeping animals, teaching summer camp programs, or whatever that is. Own it, do it the best you can, and understand all aspects of it, because you may be in higher level leadership positions like like I am now as a CEO, but I'm an educator just like you. I started off as an intern's assistant, just like many of you. And it's almost the same job in a lot of ways because my passion is the same. But the work that you do, you pick up new things like Batman, and you get new tools that you can put in your utility belt. But it's these alternatives I want you to think about. So I'm reframing my questions. And now I'm looking at what is our dilemma? Why are we in a dilemma? And how do we escape the dilemma that we're in? But first, a little bit about me. So I work at the Michigan Science Center in beautiful, as you can see, Midtown Detroit. And it's I don't know, it's a mid-sized science center. We have a planetarium, an IMAX theater, 4D theater, science stage, all sorts of demos and exhibits and stuff. And it's a fun place. And we're just, you know, excited to be in the situation we're in. I'm also a dad, and these are my kids. We went on a cruise, and they had a good time. And I thought that I had done everything in education, teaching from preschool all the way up through graduate school and or undergraduate education as well. And until I had kids, I didn't realize how much I didn't know about education. So for those out there that know what I'm talking about, and you can signify by raising your hand or nodding or crying or whatever you want to do to acknowledge this, it is a journey. It's a journey. I also want to let you know I'm from Chicago, so I'm not unused to snow and been there. I don't live. I live just south of downtown, so I don't live in the in that the high rent district. But what's interesting is in my last job in St. Louis at the St. Louis Science Center, I commuted. So my family, my wife and kids lived in Chicago, and I lived in St. Louis, and I flew almost every week. So I knew all the pilots and the gate agents and the TSA and everything. And I would not wish this life on anyone, flying back and forth, but I had that lifestyle for a while. But now that I'm in Detroit, it feels a little bit closer. So this is my typical way of getting around. And you can see in the snow, my Mustang doesn't do too well, but I try to make it work. So sometimes, this is just cleaning it off just for fun because it's not like I can drive around on a drift, playing a drift video game. As I mentioned, I'm a big football fan. Here's my wife, Elizabeth, here, and I used to go to a lot of the games. Obviously, couldn't go this year much, but last year I went to the games. And instantly, when I was in St. Louis, it was right when Mike Brown was killed. And the tough part about this situation on the right here, the hands up, don't shoot slogan started, is that we had students that lived in Ferguson. Our teen programs, we had a lot of kids from that area. They couldn't get to the programs, and we were their safety area. And they were hassled when they tried to get out by the police for leaving and coming and going. And you just forget the realities that some of our youth are in, and we need to be able to do more to get them there. It's nice being at Pepperdine. If you've ever been to Pepperdine, where graduate school, it's in Malibu and it's a beautiful campus. And I paid for all of this. Believe it. All right. Just go to your university and realize you're not a donor. You actually are a bankroller through your tuition. But I'm trying to get through it in a doctorate in learning technologies, which I'm working on now. This is my committee. Dr. Margaret Ryle is my chair on the left. And I'm interested in collaborative culture, people working together, spark innovation, and promoting entrepreneurship, which I'll talk about later. Um, my interest is in trying to figure out all the work that gets done that's not in the hierarchy. So obviously, I'm at the top of the hierarchy or the food chain, so to speak, as a CEO. But most things that get work done from my background in project management happen outside of that in informal spaces. So I'm interested in trying to transform, that's the key word, my organization to be flatter and have it be run from the center rather than the top. This presentation is not about this, but I can explain the ways that we've been doing that the last few months. Also, trying to make sure that we can break through. And the only way to break through, I think, of some of the barriers in your organization is by being an entrepreneur. So one quick thing when it comes to entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship, you can see how this is listed here at the bottom on how they describe entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship. And I don't know that I agree with this anymore, especially because look down here, like really less risky inside your organization, access to resources, I think not. and job security, you have less job security than you've had in probably your entire career right now. And it's not a joke. Even if we start to recover out of this, it's something that's going to be scary and interesting for us to deal with. But I consider myself to be an intrapreneur, someone that has created this within our organizations and supported our organizations. Doesn't mean I couldn't go outside, and I have friends and family, you need to start your own science center. And I'm thinking, what do I want to have a dusty old building to be responsible for? It's hard enough to do that in my day job, right? But you can see how Jungle Jordan and others have found ways to be creative in their organizations and support their organizations in different ways. It's amazing how your higher ups listen to you differently when you have all those followers and you're making a difference. Jungle Jordan is doing a lot more than just teaching about cheetahs. He's helping people understand that the power of what we do is in the hands of the people that do it, the keepers, the educators. People like you are what powers this organization. And if any CEO, and Lucy will tell you as well, doesn't believe that, then they need to be out of this business. The other piece here is, what is this dilemma? What is our dilemma? You know, I've seen a definition of a dilemma from a screenplay. I used to be interested in screenwriting, and I put that off to go to graduate school. But a powerful desire and a false belief tend to be the things that kind of make this up. You might think, what does this have to do with education? But we have desires, and but our beliefs. I will say that my desire has not changed. Going from an intern's assistant to be a CEO at this is my seventh museum, but the beliefs have changed in terms of how I think about things, and that's where the transformation that Dustin is talking about comes in. So let's talk about this bubble that we're in. And when I say bubble, it's the bubble of idealism that we often feel as educators, you know. And sometimes I always felt like I was at odds with the higher ups because it seemed like all they cared about was money. But it's not really true. They care about the mission too, right, Lucy? We all care about the mission. It's just the people that are in that role care about it so much that in order to balance it out, you have to kind of remind them that we got to bring in a little bread to keep everybody employed, right? So we need a better way to lower it. Like you speak about equity, we need equity in these positions in terms of how they communicate with each other so that we can have a more balanced conversation about what we want to do. Because I just don't want to hear, how are you going to make money? And sometimes the educators are under pressure to be marketers, development people, and fundraisers. It's like we have to do all this stuff. So we can't even bring up an idea. You guys work for us, you know, like that's the way I felt. Like I'm the person that they come to see, or I care for the animals that they come to see, or whatever. When I was at Shed Aquarium, you know, you saw I had a slide in here before about the rockhopper penguin. Wellington is his name. You remember during the shutdown, they showed the penguin going through the galleries. And I looked at that and I said, oh man, I know this is Shed without knowing who it was, because Shed had a knack for being able to connect like that. And it wasn't really so much Shed as it was the animals. And that made a difference. The plants and the animals included. So I want to break out of this bubble a little bit and let something grow. And there's nothing more quintessential as a symbol for growth than a tree. And we look at the tree and we see the leaves and it changes colors and it's so beautiful and you can put a tire swing on it, whatever. But trees are all about their roots. In this case, you know, my roots go deep, not just being a CEO at the Michigan Science Center, which I love doing. We had a chance to reopen. We get great media coverage in our facility from lots of different media sources. And we opened as soon as we could. We reopened on July 10th, and we've been open ever since. A lot of science centers are not open, but we opened for this reason. Look at these kids, their faces, the interest. This is what powers my interest. We put together a timeline to be able to get us through the year, and we stuck to it. I told the team I didn't want to see any excuses for COVID-19, because that's exactly what we normally do in our business, is blame everything for why we can't make a difference. We are mission-driven people. It doesn't matter what dragons come out, what monsters, whatever. None of you are going to give up on these animals. As Jungle Jordan said, we're not going to let the animals starve. All right, so how do we turn that into something where we can make a difference? Well, we had a sold out event, if you can call it sold out. It was free admission, sponsored by Exalta, just this past weekend. There are coating systems that paint your car. Probably your car has been painted by Exalta in one form or another. And we had a great day, and just the energy of the kids coming through. These are my own kids in our tornado and our earth and weather exhibit. and having fun. They have their PPP on, they're in their pods. And this is the reason why we do what we do, to give them a chance to be able to explore and to make an impact and a difference. Kids of all backgrounds, and to try to find community in our organizations. And we need to do more of that. How do we build community in our field? How do we do things that give kids exposure to things they've never seen before? In what ways can we shift their perceptions? Here's our Ames room. If you've never seen a forced perspective room, we built one called an Ames room, and this was just some of the fun that we've been having, even though we've been during the pandemic. So you can see the different sizes. Those two girls are actually the same height, if you can believe that. Um, but we have to be able to look up to in our organizations and make the difference that is needed. One of the things I enjoyed about coming to my organization is they had space artifacts, and that was what really got me excited in the beginning. Is I love space, and I'm a teacher just like you. I see myself as an educator first, a scientist and educator, and making this difference and connecting in this way is something that means a lot to me. Um, as I begin to get back into it, being in this role, which I didn't get a chance to teach in a lot of my other jobs, it just kind of took me back to my story. And my story is one probably not too dissimilar from yours. But there are a lot of twists and turns. I never thought my story would be in a situation where I would have gone and worked at so many different organizations. This is something that you may do as well. Don't be afraid to go out and leave what you think might be a good organization, to be a little bit entrepreneurial and try it somewhere else. I thought that being tied to just astronomy and physics would limit my experience. When I worked at Shed, it was a totally different world, and I had a lot to learn. But I started back at Adler Planetarium. How many of you have been to Adler Planetarium? Anybody? Either by show of hands. It was the first, at least major planetarium in the Western hemisphere. Has a lot of history, and boy, you can't see the other way, but it's the best place to look at the skyline of Chicago out, not being on a boat. Is along Solidarity Drive. But it was the great eclipse of 1991 that I want to talk a little bit about. It was an eclipse that's totality went through Mexico and as well as and Central America, and we saw a partial eclipse in our area. And how many of you saw the eclipse in 2017? Maybe you had a chance to see that eclipse. Maybe you went down to the center line. It was an absolutely amazing eclipse to be able to see a total solar eclipse just recently. And there's another one that's going to come right through the United States in 2024, 2025, somewhere in there. Well, let me tell you a little bit about experience I have, and I'll try to be brief because I'm going a little bit over my time here. But um, this is the gallery of the Adler Planetarium, and during the eclipse of 1991, as I mentioned, I started off as an intern's assistant. I didn't know that that was such a job, but the intern felt like they needed help, and so they hired someone to assist him. And that was me as an intern assistant. And in that job, I just kind of help folks out. So one of the interns former interns that was there part-time, we had hosting hundreds of thousands of people, I mean thousands of people in on the campus, and several hundred people in our facility, and there were at least 300 people in the gallery where I was. And we had a large screen television that was broadcasting totality along the center line, and I was there to help our intern who was doing the education teach about the sun. So I was there to grab his props and do different things. And he said, after doing this for hours and hours and hours, it's like watching Evil Knievel or somebody jump over a bridge. It takes forever, to see the eclipse, but once you see it, it's well worth the wait. But while he was talking, got a little parched, and he said, "Hey, Christian, can you bring me some water?" So I go through, and it took me a while because there's tons of people running around, and I had to try to find a way to get him some water. So I bring him water. So he starts drinking the water while he's talking. Here's the sun, here's the solar corona. And, this is synodic cycles, and he's describing sunspots. And, he drinks so much water that he has to go to the bathroom right as the eclipse was just starting. He said, "I'm just going to run to the bathroom. Okay, I'll be right back." But I knew he wasn't going to be right back because when I went to go get his water, I also went to the bathroom, and I was in a long line. That's what took me so long to get the water. So he said, "I'm going to bring this water to you." I said, he said, "I'm gonna go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. Take over." And he says this in front of 350 people on the microphone. And this shy kid who had never really been on a mic before, or, I was doing behind the scenes stuff. He literally puts, I don't know if you can see this, but he takes the microphone and like puts it right into my chest. And you can hear the thump over the microphone, and everyone goes from looking at him to looking at me. And I'm thinking, okay, what am I supposed to do? Well, as luck would have it, or fortune would have it, um, he said, just tell them what you know. Just tell them what you know. So I started talking about the sun and describing what was happening, and all the solar wind and the sunspots and the moon. And the people were so hungry for information, for someone who struggled to some extent through physics and feeling as though I wasn't necessarily the best student that I needed to be in front of that audience. I was everything that I needed to be in front of them. Well, this taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about what you can do and who you can be when you just tell them what you know. And the more you know, the more you can tell them, the more you can get them excited about things. And for this to happen during an eclipse, already a historically, culturally symbolic event of some sort of change and transformation, oh man, it had an effect on me. And so I have to say, I wasn't the same after this experience. When he came back from the bathroom, um, I didn't realize he had been standing behind me for a few minutes as I was talking. I turn around and I say to him, "Hey, he's back. I'm gonna turn it over to him." And he said, "No, you keep going. You're doing just fine all by yourself." This was a big deal for me. I think about it as my voyage to Gemini, because that's what they called the Great Eclipse of 1991 on July 11th. I will never, ever forget this event and this day. Why? Because the Great Eclipse of 1991 for me was a calling. Now, I can't underscore this enough, because many of you, maybe not everyone, when you got into this field, you may have said, "Oh, I'm gonna look this up. I didn't know there was a job. I'm gonna do this," but there's others that see this as a calling. I was called to this. You may have a similar event where you touched an animal, or you were teaching a camp program, and it could be something very basic. But it is where you got your calling and you realize this field is for me. And this is very important for you to consider. So, how many of people have had a calling like that? Just in the chat, go ahead and just write something down. I can't see it all, but like, express your calling. Have you had something like this that let you know this is what you want it to be? Because for me, this is the flame that burns. This is the part that doesn't get burned out. People say, "Are you burned out?" I'm like, "I'm not burned out. I'm just tired as hell. I'm just exhausted. I'm not, I mean, as long as I can lift a finger, I'm still going to continue to get that card out and do that work and educate, because that's who I am. And many of you I know are the same way. So here's my first message. I want you to connect with your calling. All right, let's go to critical question number 2. Why are we in this dilemma? And I haven't explained all the issues of the dilemma, but I think we're in the dilemma because of informal learning. Because informal learning, to some extent, doesn't really make sense. It makes sense and it doesn't make sense. One, people value it because 90% of your life is informal learning. Only a small portion of your life is K-12. And you don't even spend the full day in K-12 doing it, right? You might be thinking about it, but you're not, most of it you're learning on the job. You're learning through life. If education is about advancing the learning potential of a person, then informal learning is doing that in ways where experience is the best teacher, right? These are my 2 kids, Harmony and Noah. They were doing a little informal learning this summer. They came out to visit me in Detroit, and they wanted to look through the telescope, and it just so happened that Jupiter was visible. And this is how bad our telescope is on the right, but they could still see it. And I hear them talking and they're saying, "Wow, Jupiter's got these little things going around it, and it looks like these lights, and those are like little moons." And they're saying all this stuff. And they look at Saturn, and my son says, "I can see Saturn's body." And I'm thinking his body, but he was talking about the rings. And he did this. I don't know if you can see me here, but he did this kind of shape. as he was talking through it. And guess what? That was the exact same thing that Galileo said, right? When you're in that discovery mode, Galileo was exuberant that he saw these things through the telescope and was able to visualize these experiences. It's all part of that informal learning, this idea of discovery. And this is what we do. We're beyond just the pop-up book. We are something that creates meaning. And many people are going to have their aha moment. Maybe their passion and fire being burning is going to happen in that science fair. I'd love to talk more about it, but I actually went to Adler Planetarium and was a member as a kid, had this great experience and fondness for that experience, and never thought that I would work there or could work there, to the point that was made earlier. Lots of things are changing, guys. You remember on the left your three-panel science fair project with this version of the scientific method, but we know that the scientific method is more than just that now. And we have to acknowledge that. Real world discovery is everything. I was riding with my bike with my daughter. I saw a light in the sky, and I said, that doesn't make sense. It's not flying, it's not blinking. And I said, there's only one thing that could be that bright and that big in the northern part of the sky. It must be the space station. Went home, looked it up, and we had seen the International Space Station from a parking lot. And this is the kind of thing that can happen. Once you start learning, you get into that flow state. How many of you are familiar with flow, or this concept of flow? But Miyahi Csikszentmihalyi is a positive psychologist. He was at the University of Chicago. And he had this idea. I don't know if you can see it on here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this y-axis is a challenge and the x-axis is the skill and your abilities. And you see that part in the middle where the challenge meets your skill is kind of an important thing to consider. You're in that flow zone when it happens, but it's kind of halfway between boredom and anxiety. Now, imagine looking at this if this were a gauge, and you went through all of 2020 from the start of the pandemic and the social pandemic as well, for the racial reckoning and everything that's going on with social justice. Imagine where you felt your skills and abilities to handle the emotional. This line would have arrow would have been going up and down and squiggling around, not in flow. You may argue that with your organization laying people off and jobs being retitled, you're also might not be in that flow zone. I need everybody in my organization to be in this flow zone. I need the skills and to match the challenge. And I have to help our team be able to do that. Now, just not, I'm just on the sports analogy, so I apologize. But I think this is Game 5 of one of the championships against the Trailblazers, and you can see here Jordan was in this flow state. They call it the zone in sports, and he hit like I don't know 5 or 6 three pointers in the second half. He was just on a roll, and even he couldn't believe that he was doing it. There's a point at which things kind of take over, and you can't control it. So I want you to take a look at this sort of the get to the end of my time. I've got just a couple more slides I want to show you, but you can see how these things can be mapped out. And what you may want to do is to look up flow, get a chart like this, and start to see where your challenge level might not be enough or your skill level might not be enough to handle the challenge. And you might be in this worry zone, or things may be really anxious. Lucy can tell you that from the CEOs, there was a lot of worry and anxiety, no apathy, no boredom, no relaxation, and probably no flow or control. But this is the life we're all living. But you're living it too as part of your dilemma, because you're trying to figure out, I really want to teach, and there are no kids in the building, or there are no families on the grounds, or we're closed, or we only have a limited amount of people. This takes the wind out of your sails, doesn't it? I mean, this is what we get powered by. And so but when I'm in the flow, it's like a rocket taking off. Like I feel like nothing can stop me. And that's what learning is like. And sometimes, how many of you have felt like maybe learning and teaching kind of merge when you're in that state and you're with a group? It's hard to determine in a truly equitable learning situation who's the teacher and who's the student. And guess what? That is maximized in an informal education space. That's why we love this. We don't want to necessarily come out and just do things one way. We want to have that input and put in the feedback. So message number 2, I only have 3 messages. Find your flow. Find your flow. And I want that to be something to think about. How do you look at the challenge that you're facing and build the skill sets? Have you updated your resume? Have you thought about going to graduate school? If most of the people on this line are employed, maybe you're thinking, whoo, I made it. I still have my job. Well, are you going to keep your job? And for those that have lost their jobs, probably thinking, where am I going to go now? And what am I going to do? Well, this is a perfect opportunity for you to take time because you have no excuse to build up your skills and make that difference. And as soon as you can get back in this field, trust me, Lucy and I and others in these organizations want to get these folks back because we need help. We can't do it by ourselves. And boy, our teams that are still on board, that are still in our organizations, are about to work harder this next year than they ever have in their life. Critical question number 3, how do we escape this dilemma? Remember, the passion for something, this burning desire, and a false belief. How do we get through our false beliefs about what's important? Well, the last piece is really about reflection. How many of you, just type in yes, in the chat box, have had an opportunity to truly reflect? I don't mean you're reflective because something happened. You're like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I mean, really sitting down, either with a journal, talking things out to someone, grabbing some clay and making a future self, like whatever it takes to truly reflect, because that's what you're going to have to do to be your best and at your best during this time. And it's a lot of work to be able to do that. And it's scary, at least it's scary for me, but we have to be able to find the way to do it. Well, in order to reflect on this, I think we have to begin to look at the multi dimensions and colors that is the work that we do. And it's something that is not necessarily easy to walk through, but I'm going to show you a diagram in this next slide that you may have seen before. It's called the purpose diagram. Some people call it ikigai, which is a Japanese word that describes a kind of lifestyle and a living of finding your purpose or finding out what you're on this earth to do. It's like a raison d'etre type of approach. And there's a lot of debate about the diagram, and many aspects of the diagram match the Good to Great book and this idea of your hedgehog. But I can show it to you with ikigai removed. And how many of you have seen this diagram before, just by a show of hands? Anyone? Nobody seen this Venn diagram? Maybe a couple have. All right, now when you see this, it's going to make a lot of sense. So I'm going to be quiet for a second. I'm just going to let you look at it. Then I'm going to open it up for any thoughts or questions. I'm going to have you share with me what you think of it and what it means to you, because this is part of what I need you to see for you to be ready to reimagine, reinvent, reengage yourself during this period. So I'll just take a moment while I drink something. Okay, thoughts, shout them out. Unmute your mics or put something in the chat. Let me see if I can actually see the chat here. Thoughts, ideas. Okay, Emily says, I want to share this with so many people. Right, no wealth equals nonprofit paycheck. Exactly. It's all real. So, as you're thinking about this, what thoughts come to mind? Anybody want to unmute themselves, or who can unmute themselves and say what it might mean to you? I shared with you my passion. I talked about our mission. When I was at, yes.
I think it's really interesting that throughout my career, I can put different jobs at different parts of this. Like, ooh, this job I really loved, I was good at, but I got paid nothing. Or at this job, I didn't care about it at all, but I was darn good at it. Like, it's interesting that each of my careers have kind of, and I'm almost wondering if they're moving me like outside in, like closer and closer and closer and closer to that perfect purpose.
I feel like I have existed in a lot of these zones in the same job. kind of
Yeah.
throughout different seasons of the job. And so I think that's interesting, as you kind of find new projects and new meaning in what you're doing and new challenges, such as this year with COVID. So I think that's kind of interesting to think about too.
These are great comments. And there may be more, but this is the kind of thing that helps you do more of the guided reflection. Now, there are people that actually make thousands of dollars, just off of doing trainings using these kinds of tools as motivational speakers and such that like that. But for whatever reason, I actually enjoy hearing motivational speakers, but it's never as motivating as me seeing another educator teach. Like I always thought that that was like what inspired me because I wanted to do that. I mean, like, and education is kind of a free use where you should be able to steal whatever you see, right? So steal everything I got because we're trying to do this together, right? We're trying to elevate a population. We're trying to create equity. We're trying to give people access, trying to make sure that people feel included in the process, right? So this is the kind of thing that would be helpful for you to think about. I'm not saying that this is right. I'm not even saying that you should find the center. I don't even know if there is a purpose for one's life. I can't say that. I can only say that I don't necessarily live for a purpose as much as I live for that calling, because that calling represents almost like a devotion to me to this field. Oh, I'm going to just be in this field for a few more years and then I'm going to, yeah, right. It's been 30 years. I have not left. I can't leave. And every time I leave, there's something else that comes up, right? So you might be the same way. And if you're going to be a lifer in this, like me and like others on this call, you might as well come to grips with what you're saying. Okay, so I got to wrap up, but this is something that you might find interesting. I don't have to walk through it any more than you've seen it because it should make sense to you that sometimes you're in a profession, sometimes it's mission. During the course of a day, Lucy is probably like through all of these, right? Just one day, right? With each plate that you got spinning in the air. Okay, so let's time to wrap this up. We have to shift our perceptions. And when we created the Ames room, one of the reasons why I wanted to do it was symbolic. I wanted to create a room and a space where the walls didn't really look straight. To you, it looks straight. This is like how racism works. It looks straight. Like, what's the problem? I don't see anything until people start moving around and then you realize the wall and the floor are not shaped the way they're supposed to be shaped. We built an Ames room in our space. In part, this entire thing was inspired by George Floyd. I was trying to think of what way could I do something as a educator, a STEM educator, to explain my view of this. I have a personal view, obviously, but from a professional view of how I see what's going on, the floor is slanted for different people. If you have a learning disability, we hardly ever talk about that in our field. Somebody who has a learning disability. And you know what? Many people that do, depending on the ability, they actually get more learning done in our facilities. I can think of something that just happened the other day where a mother came and said, it just sort of these last seconds, she said, you know what? My son has never seemed so into something in his life. I just bought a membership because I love you guys so much. I mean, you guys have heard this a million times. So here's our Ames room here, and I'm probably almost a foot taller than Veronica Meadows from Fox 2 Detroit, but you can see how the room works and the kind of things we do. But this is to show you how sometimes people feel small. Jungle Jordan at the tail end of his conversation had mentioned that, I'm the only person that does this. I felt different. He's in the same room just like everybody else. Or is he? What about you for ways and you feel that way as well? Everybody has these feelings. Why would you want to wish that or perpetuate that on someone else? So finally, this transformation that we have to do from a mathematical standpoint, since I know we're science folks, as I wrap up my conversation, I want you to think about these 4 transformations. These are mathematical transformations, and these could also be how you design your strategic plan. But it's the same concept, translation. I need to move from here to there. I need to be in a different direction. I need to go in a different concept. But this is not the direction that we're in. Every single organization that's reinventing, reimagining, doing all this stuff, reframing, they're translating to another place. But they're also, the reflection part is important, which we talked about earlier. Rotation here is just a pivoting. That's all that is. If you say, oh, we need to pivot. Okay, well, how many times, you might go 360 in this environment, in this crisis. or dilation. We're doing too much. We want to do the same thing and keep our mission. We just need to do less of it. All of this is listed in our field. We have all the tools that we need, from science, technology, engineering, and math, to be able to achieve the results we need. But what I'm telling you is, if you're not looking in the mirror at yourself, whatever you see on the news or in your feed or on TV or people are talking about, you're not going to be able to make a difference on that with the work that you're doing in your organization if you are not ready to play. And guess what? That work is going to be harder than it's ever before, because there's so much less of us in our organizations, and we have just as much, if not more, to do. The one thing that I hate the most is the fact that all of this stuff is up for discussion now. Everything in your organization is on the table, and you have less resources than you've ever had. It's like I can see the food right there in front of me, but I can't reach for it. We got to figure out a way around it. There's only one way that I know of it. Warriors, educators like us, people that make a difference in the informal space. We're used to not having solid footing. We're used to being in spaces that might not be a classroom. We're used to being able to try things and get to people. Like, why aren't we running this whole pandemic right now? I mean, you could argue that, because we know how to think about dilemmas, because informal education in and of itself is a dilemma. You have a passion to learn, but you need to be able to change. So you've seen this before. We need to be able to get ourselves through a process. And from a helix kind of a proto-heliacal perspective, we need to reflect, evaluate, modify, and move in these new directions. That's what this entire conference is about, where we're going to move to and how we're going to reinvent ourselves. So finally, the message is: transform your trajectory. Begin to think about ways in which you might transform yourself. In other words, put your mask on before you help others. How about that? Put your mask on before you help other folks. Look in the mirror and help each other to be able to do that. And you'll maximize this conference. Well, I'll conclude my remarks. You can find more about the Michigan Science Center at my-sci.org. We have our website. Sort of our mantra and value proposition is: we put you at the center of science. So we want you to be able to make a difference and to feel like it's meant for you to be a scientist and have that, be a scientist, engineer, and have that STEM identity. So questions, comments, burning issues, nagging doubts, reflections, singing praise. I'll take it all at this point, either through the chat or you can unmute yourself.
Oh, Christian, thank you so much. This was, I'm so inspired. I was writing stuff down left and right.
Sorry, I went a little bit over.
Oh my gosh, it's totally okay. I hope everybody, I know everybody on this talk was inspired, and I just, you're one of your ending comments, if we'd been running, if educators had been running this pandemic. I just, I think our backgrounds as informal science educators prepare us so well for leadership in this field, or really wherever we go. And I hope everyone on this call, if you are wherever you're at in your career, if you want more responsibility, it's there for you, and there are jobs for you, and this world prepares you well for it. There were a couple of really great questions that were in the chat, and I know that there's probably some other ones I wanted to ask you. We just have a few minutes, but I wanted to ask you. Sorry, one of them was from Emily regarding exhibit protocols, and what exhibit protocols did you have to change for a safe reopening, and then did your staffing changes impact that at all?
We had to change a lot of things. I won't say everything because we didn't have a precedent for this, so I don't really know. It seemed like everything was changed, and then staffing was a challenge. So just, I know we're in the lightning round, so I'll try to be quick. Many science centers didn't reopen, and some of the conversations, people were saying that some of the leaders were saying, well, we're hands-on, and we're concerned about having these problems and issues. But I was intent on not allowing COVID to control anything. So in our first meeting when we shut down, I told the team, I don't even want you to mention COVID's name. Like everything else, you got to say her name or say his name. In this case, I don't want you to say COVID's name. And the reason why is, in nonprofits, we use so many excuses for why we can't change the world. I'm just saying, at all the organizations I've been in, we have made so many excuses. And I don't want to say that, you know, we're weak or that we can't do anything, but it's hard for us to have the confidence because people don't always give it to us.
Right.
We always have to fight for everything that we do at every level, but especially for those that are on the ground. So I told them that I think a lot of other leaders will say, well, we didn't do this because of COVID. Well, we didn't do this because of, but if you're mission based, what does it matter? Like, I'm gonna die in this business. I mean, it could be tomorrow. It could be, I want to live long enough to get some retirement after hard as I've worked. I don't have much. If you've ever done one of those retirement calculators, it's the most depressing thing in the world. If you're not depressed and you're a happy person, go online and do a retirement calculator and see how you end up. All right. So, I mean, making 625 an hour when I was first doing that job, it wasn't easy. But when it came to the protocols for exhibits, we decided that we're a science organization. We have to figure this out. We can't sit back and be in the bunker on this. And so we worked with another scientific organization called it's called NSF, International National Sanitation Foundation, based out of Ann Arbor, Michigan. And they created 25-page document for how we could make this happen. And then they gave us sort of not quite a certification, but a seal of approval to be able to do that. We were so engaged in that, we actually led the process through our entire cultural district campus of all the other museums in Detroit. And this was a major thing because when we reopened to Metro Detroit Parent, listing us as one of the top 10 sites for safe family visitation sites and one of 2 indoor facilities. This is July. So think about what this was to go out there. We haven't had a single case traced to our organization since July 10th, or behind the scenes, because we had these strict protocols. And it's a testament to science more than anything. We tried to do the best with the science, to talk to experts, not speculation, not what we were hearing on TV, and come in and do that. So that helped. As far as staffing is concerned, we laid off 2/3 of our staff. And most of them didn't come back. I was able to bring some people back with the PPP. We've reorganized our organization and we lost a lot of good people. We are alive, and there was a point at which I was thinking we might close and not reopen. I mean, it was that serious. Lucy's probably been through this as well.
Yeah, I think
Science centers and many of our organizations don't have any endowments much. We don't have much cash on hand, and we lost good people. So hopefully they get picked up, and there are ways to do it. But that was our situation.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Christian. I think we've got someone coming in just a few minutes, so I think we're going to have to end this, but there are so many great questions, and thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for joining us for this discussion.
Thank you. I'll put my my email address in the chat, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them offline. Thank you for having me.